Okay, so I'm gonna start my presentation. Looking for Alaska by John Green. Sorry I couldn't be there in person, but I hope you enjoy. So, who is John Green? John Green is an American writer born in 1977 in Indianapolis. He's a New York Times bestselling author of Looking for Alaska, Paper Towns, Turtles All the Way Down, The Fault in Our Stars, and An Abundance of Catherines. He's also a vlogger with his brother Hank Green and co-creator of Cash Course on YouTube. So a quick summary of the novel Looking for Alaska. Miles Halter, a friendless teenager obsessed with famous last words, is in search of the great perhaps. When he transfers to Culver Creek boarding school, he begins to unearth this great perhaps. His life, which was once boring, becomes filled with challenging classes, friends, pranks, and exciting new love interest, Alaska Young. While Alaska is characterized as mysterious, beautiful, and intelligent, she is also temperamental and at times even standoffish. At some points in the novel, she's affectionate, at other points, downright mean. Regardless of her unpredictability, Miles falls madly in love with her. John Green's novel is artfully divided between the before and after the story's major plot point. I'm not going to spoil what the after is, but I just think it's really important to the summary that you know that it's divided in this way. I'm going to display a video on the author's inspiration behind Looking for Alaska.
Spring school. So my first novel, Looking for Alaska, is about a guy from Florida who's obsessed with the dying words of famous people and then leaves home to go to a boarding school in Alabama. And I myself was once a guy from Florida who was obsessed with the dying words of famous people and then left home to go to a boarding school in Alabama. Traffic jam. It took me like half an hour to get through this, but you're going to get through it instantaneously. Anyway, Looking for Alaska is fictional, but the setting really isn't. The school in the book is called Culver Creek, but it is almost inch for inch the same place that Indian Spring School was in 1995. So it's always a little weird to go back because there's the interstate exit and there's Sunny Convenience Kiosk and there's Coosa Liquors where they cater to your spiritual needs. And here is the Swan and the octagonical cafeteria and the beautiful view from the classroom windows. And here is the swing where Alaska and Miles have their first conversation, where Alaska tells Miles the last words of Simone Bolivar. Damn it. How will I ever get out of this labyrinth? So it's still summer, which means no students, and also that it is hot, like 103 degrees. But just as they say, it isn't the heat so much as it's the humidity. Actually, it's also the heat. So the school was quiet in a way that it never got during the school year. And for a minute, I felt like I was walking through a ghost town, but then I realized that I was the ghost. There were only two places I really needed to see, so I walked past the fancy new dorms and past the student-run vegetable garden, and then down to the first place, this bridge over Bishop's Creek. In both Looking for Alaska and real life, the concrete outcropping beneath this bridge was known as the smoking hole. I could tell that it had been a while since anyone had been here because the briars had grown into a tangle over the path. I hadn't been down here in 15 years, but it looked the exact same as my memory, except with no cigarette butts. Maybe, I thought at first, people just don't.
Okay, I really thought that video was important to show because I really love the idea that so many authors can write successful novels based off their real life, or not even really based off their real life, but just inspired by their real life. And I think it really goes along with the quote that you should like write what you know, and that usually is a really good place to start. And then I have one more video on to show. So basically, Looking for Alaska was banned, and here's John Green's kind of like, you know, what he thought about that.
Good morning, Hank. It's Tuesday. So the American Library Association's Office for Intellectual Freedom just released its list of the 10 most challenged books of the year in the United States. Challenged meaning someone requested to have the book removed from a school or library. And it turns out the most challenged book of 2015 was Looking for Alaska, which was written by me. The book has been challenged and banned around the country for offensive language and sexually explicit descriptions. I suppose this is a kind of honor. I mean, Looking for Alaska contained the very same offensive language and sexually explicit descriptions 10 years ago, but was much less likely to be banned because, you know, not very many people had read it. Also, Looking for Alaska beat out some of my favorite books, like Two Boys Kissing by David Levithan and Funhouse by Alison Bechdel, and also The Holy Bible, which came in sixth. To be fair, the Bible does contain its fair share of explicit passages. Anyway, I'm often asked to respond to the banning of Looking for Alaska from schools and libraries, so okay. Here is my response. Text is meaningless without context, and what usually happens with Looking for Alaska is that a parent shows one particular page of the novel to an administrator, and then the book gets banned without anyone who objects to it having read more than that one particular page. The scene in question involves a very awkward and ultimately failed attempt at oral sex, which is described in very cold and clinical language. In fact, the entire passage contains only one adjective: nervous. And then in the book's next scene, two characters have a much more sensually described and passionate, but much less sexually explicit interaction. That passage ends: "We didn't have sex, we never got naked, I never touched her bare breast, and her hands never got lower than my hips. It didn't matter. As she slept, I whispered, 'I love you, Alaska Young.'" So in context, the novel is arguing really in a rather pointed way that emotionally intimate kissing can be a whole lot more fulfilling than emotionally empty oral sex. Teenagers are critically engaged and thoughtful readers. They do not read Looking for Alaska and think, "I should go have some aggressively unerotic oral sex." And they also don't read The Outsiders and think, "I should join a gang," or read Divergent and think, "I should jump onto moving trains." So far as I can tell, that kind of narrow prescriptive reading seems only to happen inside the offices of school superintendents. So yeah, I don't think Looking for Alaska is pornographic, and I don't think its readers find it titillating. But that noted, I don't think it should be up to me whether Looking for Alaska, or actually any book, is in a school or a library, because I am not a teacher or a librarian, the highly trained, criminally underpaid professionals we employ to make those decisions. As I've discussed in the past, I don't think publicly funded learning exists primarily for the benefit of parents, or even primarily for the benefit of students. It exists for the benefit of the social order. We are all better off with a well-informed, well-educated population, because that population is more likely to start successful businesses and develop treatments for cancer and write musicals about treasury secretaries. And that's why everyone pays taxes to fund public schools and libraries, regardless of whether you personally use the library or have kids in school. I think teachers and librarians know more about teaching and librarianship than I do, and I believe they must be allowed to do their jobs serving the whole public. But even beyond that, I don't believe that books, even bad books, corrupt us. Instead, I believe books challenge and interrogate. They give us windows into the lives of others and give us mirrors so that we can better see ourselves. And ultimately, if you have a worldview that can be undone by a novel, let me submit that the problem is not with the novel. Hank, I'll see you on Friday.
So I just really love this video because I feel like it really opens up the question of like where do we draw the line with young people and reading, and like should the line even be drawn? Like Looking for Alaska is a book about young people for young people, and the fact that it was banned, as John Green is saying, and I agree, it's kind of ridiculous because it's like these are real things that young people are experiencing, so why can't they read about them? Or not even that, but like also just the fact that they should be able to critically read rather than um, have reading be so closed off based off the fact that they're impressionable.
Good morning, Higgins.
Sorry. So I included a Guardian review on Looking for Alaska. I just wanted to read two of the quotes from the review because I thought the review really captured the way I feel about the book too. So Looking for Alaska cannot be merely written off as a typical boy meets girl love story, because it isn't. It's more of a tale of how love isn't as translucent as it seems. It showcases what young love and growing up really are in a brutal and honest light. How the characters communicate their relationships with each other, their past, and the pleasure that comes with being a bad kid shine through the pages. Why I prefer John Green's debut novel to his other ones is because he's made no effort to make an appropriate and proper book. I really agree with this. I feel like his novels that came after Looking for Alaska um, kind of developed in a more fantastical way, where Looking for Alaska, I feel like really stayed down to earth. And I feel like a big part of that was because it was so inspired by John Green's actual youth. But I just really loved his like kind of realistic and accurate telling. So why is Looking for Alaska important to my writing? First, I want to give you a little bit of background on the female trope used in the novel. So what is a Manic Pixie Dream Girl? It's a female character who exhibits childlike playfulness, stunningly attractive, energetic, quirky, obsessed with the male lead, and engages in crazy antics. Doesn't have a potential to fill on her own. So it's a female character that's really just kind of serving the purpose of meaning something to the male character. I included a quote from New Girl that really kind of drives my point home about what a manic pixie dream girl is. Um, so from New Girl, she says, I break for birds, I rock a lot of polka dots, I have touched glitter in the past 24 hours. I spent my entire day talking to children. I find it fundamentally strange that you're not a dessert person. That's just weird and it freaks me out. So like and that's all the traits of a manic pixie dream girl, like this kind of childishness, this kind of like othering other women, this kind of like for self um assigning this quirkiness that is kind of like this idea that like I rock a lot of polka dots, I'm different. Um and then continue on. So scenes of looking for Alaska Young. So that's the main female lead, the main romantic lead as a manic pixie dream girl. So one scene where she seems like a manic pixie dream girl is when she grabs Miles' hand, says run, 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 even though they've just met each other. It really shows like quirky, energetic, childlike. Alaska wanting to be with Miles despite having a boyfriend, and she didn't really know Miles all that well at that point. Shows like an obsession with the lead that doesn't really seem realistic. Um, Especially Miles comes in, he's like this kid who doesn't really have a lot of experience. There's really no reason for her to be obsessed with him to that level. Um, Novel focuses more on Miles growing as a person. All Alaska's problems are in relationship to how they affect Miles and influence his growth. Alaska lacks a sense of her own potential. So really the character isn't given any hobbies, ambitions. Her sense of passion really like wanes throughout the different scenes. Like she's a feminist, but then in some scenes she's like, oh, I don't have to be a feminist in this moment. And I really feel like that kind of plays into this Manic Pixie Dream Girl character. So, arguing against for why she's in some ways doesn't completely fall into this trope. So, even though Alaska's only purpose as a character is to show Miles that life can be exciting, the same can be said for other characters like Colonial. So, like, the entire book is kind of just based around Miles, and it's not really just Alaska's character that just serves him, and like her entire existence is kind of just like to kind of change his life. Um, Alaska Young is a Manic Pixie Dream Girl who's humanized and self-aware in a way that Manic Pixie Dream Girl characters really get to be. So a lot of Manic Pixie Dream Girls don't really get to, I guess, be self-aware in that way. And I found this one quote really um, just different and capturing. It says, Alaska is saying to Pudge, who's the main character, "Don't you know who you love, Pudge? You love the girl who makes you laugh and shows you porn drunk and drinks wine with you. You don't love the crazy sullen bitch." And then in response, the main character Miles is like, "And there was something to that, truth be told." So it's kind of like this Miles admitting that he kind of just sees Alaska as this kind of fun, crazy person and doesn't really see the duality of her character, doesn't want to acknowledge or take and like not like acknowledge the fact that she's a fully formed person who doesn't just have good qualities but also has bad qualities. So and also arguing for why her character doesn't fully take on the Manic Pixie Dream Girl role is her character acts her age and is realistically written in a way that like for me it was really um I could see how when I was younger reading the novel, I looked up to and I was younger than the character Alaska, like, I could look up to that character and be like, "Wow, she's so old and, she's so strong in her beliefs," but now it's like I can look back now that I'm older than the character Alaska, I could look back and say, "She's so pointedly naive and youthful," in a way that's, like, very, very obvious when you're an older person. So why is looking for Alaska important to my writing? I really feel like the Manic Pixie Dream Girl trope, even though it wasn't totally completely used on the character, just in the ways that it was used kind of inspired me to want to challenge that kind of trope and create female characters that are unique rather than quirky and they're firm in their passions, have hobbies, goals, um, and generally like writing female characters that pass the Bechdel test. So if you don't know the Bechdel test, is like when two female characters are talking about a subject other than like men. Um, and the Looking for Alaska doesn't pass the Bechdel test, so I really wanted I came out of reading the novel for a second time now that I'm older, really with these goals in mind. And I remember as a young person, I also kind of felt like I knew at the time that Alaska didn't really have any goals, and it's kind of informed my writing a lot to create female characters that are more independent. Um, and then unrelated to the Mad Pussy Dream Girl trope, I felt like the novel had a lot of accurate and honest point of views, so I feel like a lot of characters really reflected their age, their mindsets really seemed, like, on point, and just their, like, general, ambitions and kind of attitudes just seemed really on point, and just really realistic and real, like, they didn't feel like, um, cartoon versions of themselves, I guess you would say. They felt very realistic, and I really wanna continue um, that kind of character building in my own story. So I'm just gonna end the presentation with um, one of my favorite quotes from the novel. Thomas Edison's last words were, "It's very beautiful over there." I don't know where over there is, but I believe it's somewhere, and I hope it's beautiful. So I really love this quote from the novel, and I really hope you enjoyed my presentation.